everyone is supporting Caitlyn Jenner's public transformation. We'll hear from someone who was a man, then a woman, and then went back to being a man, why he has regrets about his own transformation. Now it all starts right here with the top of the feed. We have new behind-the-scenes video of the day Caitlyn Jenner said goodbye to Bruce and revealed the new identity to the world. Watch this.
I was always worried you never wanted to look like a guy in a dress, okay? If you're going to do that and come out, you really have to look the part. You have to look very feminine. You have to be able to, what I call my presentation is extremely important. When I was on hormones, living by I couldn't go through it. I was so isolated because there was no information. We've had such a movement over the last 10 years in understanding of these issues. We've had the internet develop where you can actually see other people who are going through the same struggle you're going through. You can communicate with them, okay? And you find out that you're not alone.
Joining me to discuss Samantha Shocker, Pop Trigger on Hulu.com, Erica America, radio host and psychotherapist, and Michael Catherwood, my Loveline and KABC radio co-host. Caitlyn finds support on the internet, guys. Support, she says, is there for her because she doesn't feel alone. But look at our Twitter feed. I think Twitter is a dangerous place. Here you go. Here's some samples. Bruce Jenner is a freak. I will not call you Caitlyn. His mama named him Bruce. I'm going to call him Bruce. So, Sam, I hear you sighing already. The internet. Now, I got crap for calling these people trolls. I call them trolls not because they have a contrary opinion, because they're attacking and abusive. That's why I say
right. You can not really understand it and voice that you're still struggling to figure out what that means to be transgender, what that means to be transitioning. But it's another thing to attack that person. I would call that person a troll too. I think, thank God, this is a good story to break the internet as opposed to other stories that have broken the internet before.
Like what?
At least
like Kim Kardashian.
Thank you.
Oiled down, slicked down, naked.
Yeah.
I love you, Kim Kardashian. I love you.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. With this
only
story,
Kardashian family can break the internet. Evidently.
Okay,
Right, multiple times.
At least with this, though, is with Caitlyn's story, she's educating so many people about something that a lot of us don't know about, which is evoking compassion and tolerance. And it's saving lives, considering just how many in the transgender community people commit suicide.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, Sam. And speaking of saving lives, Erica, you and I last night talked about the fact that there is real risk for Caitlyn Jenner here, and people got to recognize that. I mean, never mind the fact that the internet is abusive. You're abusing someone who's going through a major transition. After the surgery, the risk for suicide is up. The hormone therapy makes you depressed. Just the transition itself can be associated with depression. You were doing this publicly. He, as Bruce, identified as heterosexual. He still, now as Caitlyn, she likes heterosexual females.
Right.
That's going to be a tall order to attract somebody. So all this adds up. And in the article, she said she had suicidal thoughts back when TMZ broke the story. So for me, I get very upset when I see I'm going to call it, there are trolls attacking in Twitter, not the contrary opinions, the people attacking the individual who's not a cartoon character. It's someone who's a human being who is at high risk for trouble right now. They're contributing to it.
Amen.
Go ahead. Calm, guys. Let's get
That
it.
was very well said, but that's why they usually do always say that if you are going to go through that huge transition in your life, there needs to be therapy and counseling going
But
on.
she's getting that. She's getting that. But
she
even
needs to get
so,
that.
it could be risky.
But my concern is when the hysteria kind of fades, when the Vanity Fair thing is kind of over and she's back in that little beach house by herself, how is she going to feel? And that's what I'm worried about. So I think the family support system is really important in addition to any kind of therapy. But I think this is something that really she's been thinking about her entire life. This is not a little decision she made off the bat.
Even so, the risks go up in and after the transition period. Eric, I got to tell you something. The man sitting next to you has this strange grin on his face. I'm wondering what that's all about.
Uh-oh. She just shook. What was this? You mentioned Mike and you shook.
Sorry.
Watch out.
I evoked that reaction. My thing is that, of course, you're going to generate, even if you don't do something as groundbreaking as what Caitlyn Jenner's publicly doing in front of everybody's eyes, you're always going to get trolls. And if you notice, even just the people that you put up, the feed of the trolls that you got on your HLN feed, it's always the people who have 7 followers and they don't even put a picture of themselves. And I'm like, oh, great. So some guy, some literally anonymous person is not going to call him Caitlyn. oh well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if President Obama's like, flat out not going to call you Caitlyn.
I-
But
It
I
can
understand,
hurt
but it's still
though. In
hurt.
numbers, it
it
can
doesn't,
hurt.
there's no doubt that when people come out against and say, when people say anything about you, it's hurtful.
And
you and I deal with it, Drew,
all the time.
But at the same time, when I consider what I can only imagine is the struggle and the pain and the actual physical violence that the trans community has had to deal with
Yeah.
for generations.
Yeah.
A couple guys claiming that they're not going to call you Caitlyn on Twitter with their stupid little egg logo. Really inconsequential.
Here's a Twitter.
Grand scheme of things.
Let's get to this Twitter question. It's from Vivian. Do you think Kris Jenner needs behavioral health support? The man she married identified as transgender. No, I think Kris is going to be okay, but there's some stuff going on with Kris you have, don't you?
Yeah, well, she has spoken about this, and she's been very supportive of the transition and Caitlyn. However, Kris told Vanity Fair her divorce from Caitlyn, then Bruce, was, quote, the most passive-aggressive thing I think I've ever experienced. She goes on to say, why would you want to be married and have kids if this is what you wanted since you were a little boy? Why would you not explain this all to me?
Because, well, Erica, I'll let you, but let me just say, when he was
She knew. That's what
Kris knew.
Kris knew. Listen, she created the Kardashian empire. Do you know, from a sex tape? Okay, and believe me, I love the whole thing. I'm obsessed with it. It's great and awesome. But the fact that she didn't know when she said she knew that he was getting hormones, which is a higher level of commitment than just cross-dressing. I just think she didn't kind of like take it in. She didn't really. Maybe she had a blind eye a little bit. And I think what's interesting here is the one thing that kind of might bother her, and I could be wrong, but it's just a guess, is that she didn't actually masterpiece this final production. That is the biggest thing yet. She's not in control of it, so that's hard for her.
She's in control of how it's being rolled out.
That's what I'm saying. She's been in control of every single thing that the Kardashians
That
have
makes
done.
her sound so heartless.
No, she's not heartless. I think she's a really nice woman, and I think that she is dealing with her husband cheating. But I'm saying, if your husband was taking hormones, you're just going to be like,
And cross-dressing. She
and
knew about
cross-dressing.
that.
No, that means nothing. Where's that information go?
I agree. Hold up. Let me respond. Hold up. I agree with you, but I don't think that she's sitting back upset that she wasn't able to be like a puppet master throughout all this and controlling her career. I don't think that's the case at all.
Okay.
I do think anybody that's in a marriage for that long is going to have trouble accepting that their husband is transgender. So you have to be a little bit more
The truth
compassionate.
is, she's super feeling pissed that Caitlyn is not spelling it with a K.
Okay.
She's very upset.
Hold on. I want to move this along by showing you a Twitter question from Maria. She asked, could Caitlyn wake up one day and realize she is just as unhappy, depressed, miserable as Bruce was? Surgery is not a cure-all. We brought in somebody to address this issue, and we have other guests too. But first up is James White via Skype. He is director of Alpha and Omega Ministries. And James, you have an opinion on this, yes?
Oh, most definitely. I'm very concerned that so far we really haven't heard a meaningful moral and ethical worldview brought to bear on the big issue here, which isn't about television programs or reality shows. It's about what has happened to this man and how the nation is responding to it and what it means as to how we view what is a man, what is a woman. Does God have a role in any of this? How do you find real happiness? I don't believe that this kind of activity, this kind of change, this introduction of surgery and chemicals to the body is going to produce any type of happiness in the long run. And there's a reason for that.
And
Happiness is found in a completely different direction.
No.
Sam?
I have a number of friends that have completed the transition and are transgender and are so much happier because they can finally live their life as the gender that they identify with. And it's very important that Caitlyn is telling this story. This is saving lives, considering how many transgender people commit suicide.
Hold it right there. We've got to, James, hold on. James, I'm sorry. James, I'm going to interrupt you because we've got to stop for a minute. Just continue the conversation. You stay with us. I'm bringing other guests in. We're going to try to get a diversity of opinions going here. Sam, I appreciate you holding your ground on that one. And later, a man who had a sex change reassignment surgery says he made a huge mistake. He's here with us, and we're back up to this.
We get to feel like we exist. When we get to see our...
Oh, and he sticks the landing.
When when we get to see ourselves in the media, we get to feel like we exist.
It's very feminine, it's very sexy, and it's a statement. And the statement is, I'm female.
Some of us just need to name it, and that's all we need to do in order to say who we are. And then some of us need more than that in order to be who we are. And for me, I needed partial medical transition. I needed hormones. I needed to look like this on the outside in order to feel better on the inside.
Everyone in America is learning about this facet of our great community, that there are members of this community everywhere, not all of them as fortunate, but that they are our friends, our neighbors, our children, our teachers, our parents.
And in line with that, Caitlyn Jenner says she is not a pioneer, but she's doing this rather publicly. I want to show you some behind-the-scenes video from her first photo shoot. People have made the point that not every transgender gets to go through this glamorous process, but here is hers.
There's a lot of very intelligent women. You look at some of the people, the pioneers in trying to get the message out, Laverne Cox, Janet Mock, Gina Rosaro, people like that, Carmen Carrera. Back in the 80s, I was alone. And I'm kind of following in their footsteps. They made it easier for me. I hope, with my honesty, I can make it easier for somebody else down the line.
I think this is good that we're having these conversations, that it's becoming top of mind for people. I'm back with Sam, Erica, and Mike. Some, though, Mike, argue that this might be problematic for his children, or that it was selfish, or there are all kinds of arguments, about his kids.
People can say what they like, but in reality, the only people that know how traumatic or non-traumatic this is to Kendall and Kylie are Kendall and Kylie, and
his oldest son, Bird, says Caitlyn is quote, I'm going to quote him, Caitlyn is a much better person than Bruce.
And she's happy.
And Drew, we've taken that call on both radio shows quite frequently about the concern for the children. And my take always is, I think that a more well-adjusted and more happy parent is going to be a better parent, regardless of what maybe kind of is going on in the external.
Yeah.
Erica?
Yeah, I think I read a clip from the Vanity Fair article, which I thought was wonderful. And it said that, I think some of his children said he was distant at one point. And so what I think is, if you're not living your true personality and true being of who you are, you're going to be there's going to be some space there. So I think this is something that he has been slowly evolving to. And I think the older children said they've known for actually quite some time. So I think it will be harder for the younger children, Kendall and Kylie, because
Mike, they already have a tough time already.
Exactly. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, and who are we to judge at how they parent? But from my personal point of view, putting them on pretty much a very transparent reality show is far more traumatic than something that a parent does.
Hang on, I got to do this because Mike set me up too well here. Speaking of transparent, in the audience tonight, I have Zachary Drucker, the co-producer of the Amazon series Transparent. Mike, which I love that series, by the way.
Good.
Now, Zachary's chosen to keep her original given name as Zachary. What do you feel about the topic we're getting into here today? You've been through this. You're you and I talked and agree about how a diverse community this actually is.
Absolutely. I mean, the trans community is a community in peril.
In peril?
In peril.
Why?
Violence against trans people is staggering. The suicide rate of trans people is 41% compared to, I believe, 4%.
But a lot of it, the suicide rate goes up after some of the surgeries. Are we treating this the wrong way?
I can't really speak to post-surgery, pre-surgery suicide rates, but, I can speak to the larger social problems, which are things like employment discrimination. It's very hard for trans people to gain employment.
You don't have trouble. You're a producer, right?
But
how would anybody know you're not a woman?
I'm really fortunate. I come from a really supportive family, a family that always told me that I could be whomever I wanted to be and to be proud of who I was, which is one of the reasons why I chose not to change my name. I thought, I could disappear really easily into society, but to be an out trans person is sort of more of a revolutionary act.
And that used to be the way to do it. I spoke to Renee Richards, who was one of the first sort of public transgender individuals. Remember, she was a tennis player. Yeah, that was the issue of being a tennis pro that really brought it all to the fore. And she was saying back in the day, they had to fade into the woodwork. I want to bring James White back again, the director of Alpha Omega Ministries via Skype. James, you've heard what we've been talking about here. We're all trying to do what's good for people, right? None of us wants to harm anybody, but you still feel this approach of trying to help people transition is incorrect approach.
Well, Dr. Drew, you yourself brought up the statistics, and you're correct about those statistics in regards to the results of this kind of radical introduction of drugs and surgery. But what we're hearing here is a fundamental clash of worldviews, and that's not really what we've gotten into a discussion of yet.
What's the
I
clash?
have to ask the question, what if Jesus was right when he said, have you not read from the beginning that God made them male and female? What if there is something really good?
James, I got to interrupt you. I have to interrupt you because I have patients that have something called an ovotesty. There's one thing together. They're hermaphrodites. I have patients that are mosaic hermaphrodites. I have people with ambiguous genitalia. What do I do with them? They're not perfect. They are messy.
I barely have a penis.
Go ahead, James. The problem, of course, with that is that we are attempting to address an entire cultural issue on the basis of, well, you know, the percentages of what you just mentioned, and that's not the situation that we're talking about here.
Well, no, but I mean, to argue that God creates perfection is a faulty argument.
And also, Mr. White, I mean, the idea of transgender individuals and androgyny dates back far longer than Jesus Christ himself. I mean, there has been people in human civilization bending gender and actually changing their gender through crude science far before Jesus was born. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I'm fully respectful of your religious beliefs, but your religious beliefs don't necessarily apply to something that humanity has been doing since before the Bible was even conceived.
Right, but he's saying.
But the point, of course, is this is a worldview issue. This is a worldview issue, and we're going to have to decide what our ultimate authorities are. I'm not sure who you are referring to, but the Jesus I'm referring to rose from the dead. I think that gives him a little bit of extra authority to address this particular issue.
From right here, I got to go to our audience member who has a question. Please go right ahead.
Hi, Dr. Drew.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm very curious as to your opinion. What makes somebody wait such a long time before they acknowledge their desire to be the opposite sex?
I will address that. I believe I have to take a break. Do I not? I will answer that question. I also will introduce you to someone, a male, who had a sex reassignment surgery to become a female, and then he went back to being a male. He feels it was a mistake. We'll have James here. We have Zachary here. We have our pal here, and we're going to keep going on this after this.
Are you a woman?
Yes, for all intents and purposes, I am a woman. I was not genetically born that way. As of now, I have all the male parts and all that kind of stuff. So in a lot of ways, we're different, okay? But we still identify as female.
Of course, that was from Bruce Jenner's interview on ABC with Diane Sawyer. We're discussing Caitlyn Jenner and whether she may possibly have regrets after having had multiple surgeries and identified as a female. I'm going to answer that question about why Bruce waited so long to identify as Caitlyn. And I've talked to a number of physicians and surgeons who deal with this population who tell me that this is very common. And they don't know if it's going to be a trend, that's just generally what happens. It takes 5 decades for somebody to come to terms with this. But what they speculate rather is that it's more a function of people becoming more accepting of it now. And the people like Bruce have been thinking about this their entire life. And now that there is an opportunity, things are more open about this, they can come forward and really complete this transition. And that's your sense of
I agree with you 100%. And I really take issue with what James was saying, for instance, because I have I'm a religious person myself. I should say more spiritual, but I'm surrounded with a lot of religious people. And I feel like his views using Christianity as his crutch and Jesus Christ
it's a secular society after all.
But there's so many Christians out there that are accepting and loving and supporting this. So I don't want him, James, to be using religion because it's giving religious people a bad name.
I know James is smiling, but James, stand by. Of course, got Sam, Erica, Mike here. I want to bring somebody else in via Skype. Walt Heyer. He is the gentleman who had the gender reassignment surgery, regretted it 8 years later, had more surgery to reverse the procedure. He is the author of the book Paper Genders, Well, of course, we're fascinated by your story, and I'm fascinated medically how those procedures were done, but God bless you. Do you consider the situation, I understand you consider the situation with Caitlin to be somewhat dangerous?
Well, I think it has the potential to be dangerous for sure. And I think one of the things is that the tremendous amount of media and exposure to someone at this point in a transition, with all of the pressure and all the things going on, certainly this is the key time in a transgender's life, and certainly is exciting. But I worry about the time when the lights go off and the shows go off, and all of a sudden, nobody's around.
You're there with your private, as we say, you're there with your private thoughts. Now, Walt, you felt you needed to get the surgery. Why did you get it if, after all, you didn't really need it?
Well, I started as a child transgender at the age of 4 or 5, and I began cross-dressing and did that throughout my life. I did get married like Bruce and had 2 children, had a fairly normal family, but I was still struggling with gender identity issues. I had this tremendous desire to change genders that just continued to build and build over the years.
And then why did it remit after you had the surgery?
Yeah, remit? It was when I had the surgery, I was excited. People came up to me and said, "You've never been happier." And I was doing well. I mean, I was successful, and I lived successfully for 8 years.
As a woman?
I enjoyed being, as a woman, I enjoyed it.
Well, what went wrong?
Well, after about 8 years, and I started studying psychology because I wanted to become a counselor and help people, I started to realize that there's a lot of other things that hadn't been talked about regarding transgenders. And I learned that many transgenders suffer from what we call comorbid disorders. They're secondary disorders that are not diagnosed prior to surgery, such as separation anxiety, dissociative disorders, bipolar disorders.
But I would argue, Erica, I think you'd say the same thing, which is that that's well known to be the case, but that doesn't typically change the gender issue.
Well, no, I kind of agree with you. What's his name? I'm sorry?
His name is Walt.
Well, okay, I agree with you in that. I think that's why I say it's so important to get, therapy and to really know that it's something that you want to do, because you could be, transgender and want to change sexes, or it could be there could be a mental illness.
But even when
and
there
he's
are,
saying
but
that
listen,
when researching he recognized that there were other things, and it wasn't the transgender thing.
Hold on. My experience has been, Walt, straighten me out on this, and my experience has been that even when you treat the associated, that comorbid disorders, the gender issues remain. So I'm curious why they suddenly remitted or reversed in your case, even when you were living happily as a woman. That's confusing to me.
Well, because a lot of times if the disorder is treated properly, the desire to change genders won't be there.
But not typically. Not typically, though, right?
Well, the thing about it is there isn't real good data to say typically one way or the other. We do know, and I know from my website that gets 30,000 hits a month, that people write me all the time and acknowledge that they were suffering from a disorder that started in their childhood that was never addressed prior to surgery, and they themselves decided to transition back like I did.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to get a commentary from Zachary, who's been through this and is connected to the community. How do you respond to Walt?
I think that the conversation we're having about surgery is actually really regressive and old. We've moved way beyond that, and
meaning what? Why?
Is not necessarily something that's rooted.
Hold on,
in
Zachary. Hold on.
You
guys go. We're moving so fast through very confusing material. I want to make sure people get their head around this. So, what do you mean with this is regressive?
I mean, okay. Well, I think that we've moved beyond the conversation about surgery.
Okay.
And about whether we have surgeries or not. That's not the problem. The problem is a society that has no place for people who are not living in their assigned gender, right? Which is it's a culture steeped in misogyny. Basically, this is an extension of feminism. It's a feminist issue. Gender equality is equality for everyone. Okay, so talking about treating trans bodies.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Treating trans bodies. Finish your thought.
The medicalization of trans bodies is actually systemic of a culture that's steeped in patriarchy and misogyny.
Are you confused, Mike? I'm a little confused.
Yes and no, but I see where Zachary's coming from, but at the same time, where Walt is, what he's saying, if he personally felt that he wanted to transition back. I just think that, aren't you happy that there's a world that exists that you were able to transition both ways happily?
Yes.
Regardless
And
of what
live
you want to
happily
do. Yes, I
both
mean,
ways.
I'm very happy that you were able to live happily as a woman and happily as a man. And I
And
think
get the trauma treatment.
right. I
whatnot.
mean, regardless of what the underlying trauma might be, and for some people, I think the fact that we are looking to create a world, hopefully, where someone can do such.
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
Exactly, Mike, where everything is okay. And well, your story is great, but I don't think you should be going around saying, well, every person should go back. It's not like that. I think it's like every story we need to look at individually.
Why do people have an opinion about how someone wants to live their life and how they identify? Period. It's crazy.
Well, and on top of that, there's so many layers to this. I got to tell you, I hope people at home are getting, this is the best conversation about this I've seen on television, and I hope it's digestible on television because it's complicated. In addition to what each of the three you said, we have Zachary over there talking about the sociological issues, which is just another layer to this. And you're saying that's primary. We're talking about the psychological. There's many, many different factors here. It's complicated. Ultimately, I agree with Sam that the fact that people have the opportunity to live their life in a free society as they choose is a great blessing. We'll answer more about this, about Caitlin, about transitioning after this.
And he was so honest and people were so excited.
Formerly known the American Olympian, formerly known as Bruce Jenner.
It was almost a relief that it came out and he was so honest and people were so accepting. I think he's just so happy that people really do accept him so much.
When you go from being somebody who has secrets, that has this big mystery about yourself that you don't want anybody to find out, it's enormously liberating to just say, you know what, this is who I am.
She looks so free and happy, and to be honest, I haven't ever seen previously Bruce, but now Caitlin look so comfortable in her own skin, and I think that's really what she's trying to put out here, right? Is that, listen, there are no more secrets, she says.
All right, we're talking about Caitlyn Jenner, and the question at the core of our conversation is this a cautionary tale? Is this a cause for concern or a cause for celebration? Back with Sam, Erica, and Mike. And James is out there on Skype. He wanted to ring in on our conversation. I'll go right out to him. James, what was it you wanted to tell me?
Well, I'm really concerned that I do not hear any discussion of the worldview issues that should give the foundation for any meaningful discussion of this subject. If we don't discuss the worldview that gives rise to our decisions, then all we're doing is giving our own personal opinions. That's not how you deal with societal issues.
Why?
Those
I'm not
issues
sure
are
that
not
this
being
is a
addressed.
societal issue. This is a Caitlyn Jenner issue.
It's a personal issue. You can
But
do it with
is
your body. You can do whatever.
It very clearly is a societal issue.
I feel like I hear some fear in your voice. I'm just saying. I feel like there's fear that if I thought that was you laughing.
There's no fear. I've had my worldview identified as a crutch. I've had identified as hateful. The reality is Jesus is my crutch.
If people start doing
He's the
this
Lord
and it
of
becomes
all.
more common and accepted, is that going to mean that the Christianity beliefs that you have are not valid? I think you can believe those.
Not in any way, shape, or form. That gets us back to the worldview issue. It doesn't matter what society says. The issue is if God has made us in a certain way and we go against the way He's made us, the result is not going to be life and flourishing. It's going to be destruction and death.
James, let me bring in here really quickly. But James, hold on, James. Doesn't God also teach to be loving and accepting? While you are condemning this community, you're condemning this community.
And
You are.
by the way, just while we're at it, I'm going to throw away my license, guys, because I do everything against nature by pushing back disease and keeping people alive longer. They should be alive. We do all kinds of things against
removing tumors,
and things that God
What
created.
does that have to do with what I said? I'm confused. I didn't say anything about that at all. What I was talking about was God's creative purpose in men and women, and that's how they come to know the fullness of happiness is when they follow what God has
Each
created
person
them
to
to be.
decide if there is a God or not. I mean, I'm a spiritual person. I'm not saying that, but why are you saying that God is this and that, and we have to do it according to that?
Well,
Every person has the
because
right
I was asked
to
to give a
believe what they
Christian
want to believe.
perspective, and Christians believe that God has in fact spoken.
So
And he
that
spoke
means
of
that you want
clarity
to
in
become
Jesus Christ.
transgender.
But
Wait a
here's the
second,
deal.
I'm Christian and I don't believe that.
Here's the deal.
That's it.
Let me play host for a second. Host, hang on. Host here. Host. I want James to give his opinion. I know a lot of people feel like James does, and I think to leave James out of this conversation is a huge mistake. Now, we're not going to agree with James necessarily, but there are people that do. He wanted to state his opinion. I want him to have the opportunity to do so. You have a question as well.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Drew. I know that it's a great thing now that mental disorders are out in the open. We can speak about them. They're accepted. Whether you have OCD, bipolar, depression, anything like that, you have a chemical imbalance.
Right.
I respect that. It's a huge issue. Is this something that, could be some sort of mental disorder in the future?
Transgender.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's actually gone the other way. It used to be, we just call it gender identity disorder, and then it's still gender dysphoria, and it's been less pathologized, just the way being gay was less pathologized.
Right.
That was a pathology at one time. I want to give Zachary a chance to answer that question.
I don't think that being trans is a mental disorder by any means.
It is associated, though. There's comorbid disorders at a higher incidence, right?
Don't you think, couldn't there be someone who has issues that goes to that lifestyle, but maybe that's not really for them? I'm saying for you and for Caitlin, it's innate, it's real. But do you think?
Look, the story is always changing.
Yeah.
Things mean different things to you at different times in your life. So, we're evolving. That's why we're humans. We're always changing from one moment to the next, contingent on our environment, on the people that we're around. We're always different. We're always evolving. We're always moving forward.
And Walt is a good person to go to address that very issue. Walt, how do you respond to what James was saying?
Well, I think it's important to understand that when somebody goes through a transition, they're dealing with so many different things, and I can only tell you that I'm here to show the audience and the people in this discussion that some people get misdiagnosed and should not have the surgery because it is not always successful. And so this is important, I think, for people to understand and not get motivated too much by Bruce's situation and think, well, it's going to be good for them because it was good for Bruce. But I know long term, 5, 6, 7, or 10 years out, people do sometimes regret having the surgery.
Okay. Now, Zoe Tur, thank you, Walt. Zoe Tur, a well-known transgender reporter, has been critical of how Caitlin has come out. Here's what she said last night.
This is not somebody that is going at their pace. This is a highly professional rollout of a product. And it's all timed. It was timed. The ABC interview was timed for sweeps. And now we've got a reality show coming up. And this is to draw viewers in. For anyone to say that this is a transgender person moving at their pace is absurd. One has to wonder what Jenner is truly thinking.
And Sam, this is where we started this conversation, didn't we? We were talking to Erica, you guys were talking about the rollout and what Chris's involvement were. Is he okay with this? She okay with this?
Caitlin's also, it's taken decades to finally come to this decision. So you can imagine, sure, that and she even attempted in the 80s. So of course now it's going to be this fast rollout process because she's been waiting her whole life to be the person she identifies as.
I say one thing, and that is thank you, Caitlin, for doing this publicly so we can continue this conversation, have this conversation. It's an important conversation. Thank you, Zachary, Walt, James, panel, for participants here in the audience who have given us a chance to really try to dig into this. It is complicated. It's not going away. It affects many areas of many different issues. We'll keep the conversation going, but we're going to change gears and go to ClickFix. I've got a woman who thinks she's saving money and avoiding a trip to the dentist by super gluing her teeth to her jaw. Oh my God. We're back after this.